They took me to pray to people who called injections vitamins. I kept quiet until I realized that my silence was their tool. And then I started counting, not prayers but symptoms. I remember that day in detail. My mother and I were driving in her old car, which rattled loudly over every pothole. She kept repeating one phrase like a prayer. There will be order here. We will start over. I was 16. The divorce happened 4 months before the House of Grace. A quick trial, temporary custody for my mother. They explained to me, it's more stable this way. In reality, there was no stability at all. My father packed his things in silence, and I still believed that adults knew what they were doing. She said it over and over again, as if trying to convince both me and herself. When we drove up to the gates of the House of Grace, I was the first to notice the sign with the quote, "Peace in the heart, order on the outside." Mom read it aloud and even smiled. But the smile was brief and unfamiliar. I had almost forgotten what it looked like since the divorce. The grounds looked as if they had been drawn with a ruler. Trimmed lawns, white buildings, people moving slowly in sync, as if to an invisible melody. I felt a chill in my chest. It seemed dangerous even to speak aloud here. We were met by a woman in a light cardigan. She introduced herself as Sister Mary and immediately handed my mother a thick folder with papers and me a thin gray book with embossed letters. A guide to virtue for the home. The cover was cold like metal. "Welcome, Sophie," she said in a sweet voice. "It's easy to live here when you know the rules. Here is your badge and prayer schedule. Tomorrow you will have a little habit assessment. It will help your body get used to the routine." I nodded, although a completely different word echoed in my head. Control. And then he appeared. Caleb Ward. I didn't know yet that everyone called him Father Caleb. But even without the titles, I could sense that he was the boss here. Tall, confident, with a gaze that kept you in your place. He shook my hand, and although his smile was warm, his fingers lingered longer than necessary, as if checking to see if I would pull away. "Your mother has taken a brave step, Sophie," he said in an even tone. "Now your life will be easier. There is no punishment here, only correction. The soul loves order, and the body quickly learns obedience." Caleb gave my mother what the court and the rental market did not. A roof over her head, a job in the kitchen in exchange for room and board, people who called her sister. He said, "As long as you're with us, you won't fall." He also whispered that there, outside the gate, Dad would take me away through the courts because he is unstable. A cheap room, full pantries, and the fear of losing me. That's why Mom clung to their threshold so tightly. Mom listened to him as if it were a weather forecast. If he promised sunshine, she already believed that tomorrow it would definitely shine. Our new home looked like a hospital ward, only a little bigger. Empty shelves, a clean table, the smell of cheap soap. In the living room, Mom laid out sheets with a schedule. Everything was timed down to the minute. Wake up at 5:45, prayer at 6:15 a.m. A modest breakfast, online school in the common room, kitchen duty, evening prayer at 8:30 p.m. Quiet time at 9:30 p.m. She looked at this sheet as if it were a map to a new, better life. "This will help us," she said quietly. "No more chaos." I was silent. Inside, I felt that sometimes coming up with something of your own is the only thing that keeps you afloat. But here, coming up with something was forbidden. In the house, it lasted 8 months. The next morning, I was taken for a habit assessment. A white room, scales, a tape measure, a metal table. A man with short hair stood in the doorway. His badge read, "Marcus, Deacon." His unblinking gaze made me cringe inside. Next to him was a woman in a blue robe. Kayla. She smiled at me so warmly that for the first time in a long time, I felt that maybe someone here could really be on my side. "It'll be quick, don't worry," she said softly. She weighed me, wrote down the numbers, measured my waist, and asked strange questions. How much I sleep, whether I like sweets, how often I get angry. For every "it depends" I gave, she asked for a precise answer. And then they showed me a list of modest clothing. Longer skirts, looser blouses, no red or yellow, too loud. I didn't even ask why, because I knew the answer would always be the same: order. "Well done, Sophie," Sister Mary concluded and stuck a sticker with the date on my form. "Your body will soon begin to speak the right words." A chill ran through me. If my body started to speak, those words would no longer be mine. That evening, I lay in my new room looking at the book The Guide to Virtue and thinking, if they want me to be silent on the outside, then I have to speak somewhere else. I took out an old notebook hidden at the bottom of my backpack and wrote on the first page, Diary of Purity, only mine. I didn't know yet that 8 months here would be one long morning without dawn. The first week at the House of Grace was not like days. It was like a broken record playing the same track over and over again. The bell rang before dawn, time to get up. I dreamed about ordinary things. School friends, walking with my dad in the park. But as soon as I opened my eyes, everything dissolved and was replaced by rules. Prayers were mandatory. You stand among dozens of others, everyone repeating the same words like echoes. I caught myself moving my lips automatically, while inside I was thinking about something completely different. The smell of the school hallway or the noise of the soccer field. After prayer there was a modest breakfast. Tasteless porridge, a small piece of fruit, tea without sugar. Sister Mary liked to repeat, excess food makes the spirit lazy. I listened and remained silent, swallowing not only my food but also my own words. In the study room all the girls sat upright, cameras watching their every move. On the desk was a sheet with a purity score table. Everything was recorded there. Prayers, fasting, even temptations. The sisters said it was help. I knew it was control. If your points dropped, you were isolated or sent to the reflection room. Kayla was around more often than the others. She had fewer fake smiles and more shadows in her eyes. She gave injections, vitamins, as they called them here. A small syringe, a quick touch to the shoulder. First I didn't think about it. But after a few minutes my head would fog up, and sometimes the world would start to spin. It's for strength to endure the prayers, she explained in the tone of someone repeating a memorized text. But there was a hint of something else in her voice, as if she wanted to say more but couldn't. Marcus was always somewhere nearby. His presence was like a cold shadow behind my back. He walked so quietly that you could jump when he suddenly appeared next to you. If you smiled too loudly, he would already be writing something down in his notebook. I learned not to laugh. I learned to look down. One day after the vitamins, the floor beneath my feet suddenly began to sway. I sat down, but the light in my eyes still flickered. I pretended it was because of fasting and asked for water. Kayla quickly handed me a glass. Her fingers accidentally touched mine, and it was the first real sympathy, not rehearsed in prayers but human. That evening I thought for the first time, something is wrong with these injections. Mom, I feel sick after these injections. My head is foggy. I tried to explain, hoping she would understand. It's cleansing, daughter. Your body is resisting because it's used to chaos. Endure it and it will become easier. I don't want this. You are confusing fear with conscience. We're not hurting you here. We're healing you. I opened the diary hidden between the lining and the cover of my backpack and wrote, after the injection, dizziness. Time 3:40 p.m. Food, only an apple. Water, 1 glass. Mood foggy. I knew that if someone found this diary, punishment would be inevitable. But to remain silent meant losing myself completely. At night, when everything was quiet, I heard someone crying softly in the next room. Here crying was always quiet. Crying loudly was considered disobedience. I lay in the dark and looked at my badge hanging on the chair. It glowed in the semi-darkness like a mark. And I thought, if they count every bit of my purity, I will count too. In my own way. The next day, after another injection, my head spun again. I tried to focus on the board where our points were displayed, but the numbers blurred. And for the first time I realized these rituals don't just eat away at the days. They eat away at me. I opened my diary and wrote, they say it's strength. In reality it's weakness. But now I see. And that's when it first occurred to me. If I keep writing everything down, maybe someday it will save me. That day, I was told that my dad was coming. My heart suddenly felt heavy. I didn't know how to react. In the Handbook of Virtue, there was a whole section on external connections. Excessive communication with those who have not accepted the order destabilizes the home and the heart. But this was my dad. After the divorce, the court ruled on an interim order. Until the custody assessment is complete, I live with my mother and have 2 weekly meetings with my father for 60 minutes in the presence of a third party. The basis for this was my mother's statements about his emotional breakdowns and the conclusion of a family counselor. The court emphasized that this was a temporary measure until the main hearing. When my mother and I moved to the House of Grace, the custody coordinator designated their guest pavilion as the location for these visits, glass, cameras, and a visitor log at, formerly a neutral supervised area. His visit was only allowed in the guest pavilion, a room with glass walls, cameras in the corners, and air that smelled of antiseptic. In the center was a table, 2 chairs opposite it, and a third to the side. Sister Mary was already sitting there with a notebook. An observer, as they called it. When the door opened, I barely recognized him. He looked older. A few new wrinkles, graying temples, weary shoulders. But his eyes. They were the same. The same ones that once laughed with me in the park when we flew a kite. "Hello, sunshine," he said quietly, as if afraid his voice would break. "How are you?" I wanted to say so much. About the tasteless porridge, about the vitamins that made the world spin. About the diary I hid so they wouldn't find it. But I knew every word was being recorded here. So I just shrugged. "Everything is fine with us," I replied as I had been taught. "Order brings peace." Sister Mary smiled and wrote something down in her notebook. Dad looked at me as if he could see through my words. And then he noticed my wrist. There was still a mark on it, a small bruise from the sleep hold, when Marcus made me kneel longer than I could bear last week. Dad's eyes flashed. He took a sharp breath as if he wanted to explode but held back. His fingers clenched the edge of the table so hard that his knuckles turned white. "Sophie," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully, "I'm always here for you, even if they try to convince you otherwise." I wanted to nod, I wanted to reach out my hand. But fear sat inside me like a stone. Instead, I quietly ran my fingers across the table. Our old sign that we had invented when I was little. One touch meant, "I hear you." Dad noticed. His gaze softened, became warmer. Sister Mary coughed to interrupt the moment. She announced that time was running out. 20 minutes, that was all we were allowed. When Dad got up, I saw him discreetly slip something into his pocket. Perhaps copies of documents. I knew he had already written to Child Protective Services, but there had been no response. Marcus stopped him on the way out. They exchanged a few words, but I couldn't hear what they were saying. I just saw my dad's shoulders tense up. He even turned around again as if to check if I was watching. I was watching, and for a second I believed that all this wasn't forever. That evening, walking down the hallway, I heard Sister Mary say to another sister, "He'll file a complaint again. But they won't believe him. Now we have protocols, orders, signatures. Everything looks clean." The word clean struck my ears. I went back to my room and opened my diary. On a new page I wrote, "Dad saw. He didn't give up. If they're lying, I have to leave traces. For him. For myself." And I realized, these are no longer just notes. This is my only evidence. My father couldn't just take me away. There was an interim court order for custody. Any attempt to see me outside their pavilion was immediately interpreted by the community as a violation of the rules, and any emotional tone as instability. He had 2 options, to adapt to their schedule or go to court. He chose court. Dad left, but now he knew I give signs. I remembered Kayla from my previous life, before the divorce. She often came to visit us, sat with my mother in the kitchen, drank tea, and laughed at little things. After the divorce, she disappeared. And now she was standing in front of me again. Not my mother's friend, but a nurse at the House of Grace. A white coat, a badge, a face that skillfully hid too much. Within the community, she was called the Hands of Order. She gave injections, handed out pills, and prepared bitter teas for cleansing. Formally, she was a nurse. But I knew she had no right to prescribe medication. Once I was taken for a so-called quick cleansing. This meant that someone was suspected of disobedience and needed to restore balance. The room was cold, the cabinets were filled with unlabeled bottles, and on each shelf were folders labeled Protocol No Under. I sat on the couch and watched Kayla prepare the solution. She moved confidently, but leaned closer and whispered so quietly that Marcus, who was standing in the doorway, couldn't hear. "If it gets worse, fall forward, understand?" I almost flinched. It didn't sound like a nurse's instruction, but like advice from someone trying to save a life. Marcus glanced sharply. Louder, I didn't hear you. Kayla straightened up and repeated in an official tone. If it gets worse, the patient should lie forward so as not to injure his head. Marcus nodded and froze again like a shadow in the doorway. I took a sip of bitter tea, and my throat immediately tightened. Kayla wrote something in the logbook, her hand barely trembling. I'm not allowed to give this injection, Kayla whispered as she poured the solution. But if I refuse, they'll kick me out of the dorm. And I have nowhere else to go. And my mom is sick, I send her everything I earn. They know. That's where they're putting the pressure. When Marcus turned away, she quickly slipped a small package into my pocket. Later, when I was alone, I saw that they were glucose test strips. I didn't understand why she gave them to me, but I understood one thing. She wanted me to take care of my own body. Sometimes I would catch a glimpse of Kayla through the open door of the staff room. She would sit with the rapid cleanup protocol folder and stare at Caleb's signature for a long time. The pastor's signature was where the doctor's signature should have been. She would close her eyes and look as if she were weighing something heavy. That evening, I held those strips in my hands and felt my heart beating painfully. It was the key. Small but real. I opened my diary and wrote, Kayla. She sees. She's in it too. But she can be my witness. At that point, I didn't know how far she would have to go to tell the truth. The strips in my pocket weighed more than all their sermons. The room I lived in was small and almost empty. A bed, a wardrobe, a table. A schedule of prayers and shifts hung on the wall. Everything had to look right. Without a single unnecessary thing. But inside the drawer, I hid something more important than any guide to virtue. My diary. I started writing in it when I was younger. First it was just ordinary thoughts and sketches. But now it was notes about my body. Dry numbers, short lines, weight, pulse, headaches, injections, night prayers. After Kayla gave me the strips, I started measuring my glucose levels. Secretly, when no one was looking, I pricked my finger and wrote down the numbers. The date, the reading, my mood. A map gradually took shape on the pages. A map of what they were doing to me. Night shift, weakness. For dizziness. Injection, drop in glucose. The more I wrote, the clearer it became. This was no coincidence. But fear was always there. If they found the diary, it would be the end. Then they would send me to the thinking room. That's where they took those who broke the rules. I didn't know what happened there, but when people came back, their eyes were empty like dolls. I hid an envelope between the pages. I wrote my dad's name on it. I didn't dare give it to him, but the thought that he might one day read it and understand everything gave me the strength to hold on. One evening, a new order was announced. For the older girls, 48 hours of cleanliness duty. Please, can I skip the night of cleanliness? I asked my mother. Don't ask for the easy way out. Order is love, which sometimes hurts. 2 nights without sleep, with limited water and prayers on my knees. I felt a chill in my chest. I knew that if I endured this, my notes would be the only proof that I was still myself. The main hall was lit by lamps, but the light was cold and merciless. It smelled of sweat, wax, and dampness. Several of us girls were made to kneel in a circle. We were only allowed to drink water from small cups at certain times. The rest of the time was spent in prayer and silence. My knees quickly began to go numb from the stone floor. At first, I counted the minutes, trying to tie time to my heartbeat. But soon the sense of time disappeared. All that remained was my aching body and the thought that there was nowhere to run. Marcus walked among us like a guard. His footsteps echoed hollowly in the silence. Any movement, and his voice cut through the air. Prove your loyalty. Sometime around 2 in the morning, my hands were already shaking. My head was swaying and spots were floating before my eyes. I pretended to pray, but my lips wouldn't obey. Suddenly, I heard a whisper nearby. Kayla leaned over so that no one could see her. If things get really bad, fall forward. Not backward. Remember that. I didn't even have time to nod. Darkness rolled in waves. My heart was beating too fast, then it seemed to stop. My ears were ringing, and the floor beneath my palms was becoming soft like water. Marcus shouted something, but his words didn't reach me. The last thing I felt was my body actually falling forward. The cold floor hit me and darkness engulfed everything. I woke up to a smell. It was sharp, sterile, cold. Not at all like the musty air of the house of grace. My eyes were difficult to open. People in green coats stood over me, holding tubes, bags of liquid, and beeping machines. Electrolyte levels are below normal, someone said. And there's a sedative in her blood. I didn't understand all the words, but I could sense that they were talking about me. And then I saw him. Dad was sitting nearby. His fists were clenched so tightly that his fingers were white. His face was exhausted, his eyes red. Not from alcohol, as Mom said, but from tears and insomnia. "I'm here, Sophie. I'm not going anywhere," he whispered. Mom was in the room too. Her voice cut like a knife. "She has to come back. It was voluntary fasting. She's used to these rituals. She's dehydrated." Dad exploded. "And there are drugs in her blood that shouldn't be there." The doctor with the Ortiz badge leaned toward me. "Sophie, have you been injected with anything in the last few days?" I wanted to answer, but my lips were stuck together. Only my fingers clenched, as if I were holding a pen. Then Dad took a few sheets of paper out of his pocket. I recognized them immediately, copies of my diary. He had kept them. "These are her records," he said. "The dates of the injections, the symptoms. It's all here." I looked at Kayla. She was standing to one side holding a folder. Her voice was quiet but firm. "Call Child Protective Services immediately. If you don't do it now, they'll take her back. And they'll cover it up." The room fell silent. Dr. Ortiz nodded and left, dialing a number on his work phone. I lay under the floor, listening to the rhythm of the machine, and for the first time felt something new. The smell of the hospital became the smell of freedom to me. I breathed in for the first time. A woman with a Child Protection Department badge entered the room. She was tall, composed, and dressed in a strict suit. She introduced herself. "Taringwen." Her voice was calm, but it had the firmness of someone who was used to hearing lies and separating them from the truth. "Sophie, I need to talk to you without your mother." "It's important," she said, looking at my mother. Mom smiled tensely, as she always did when she wanted to look right. "She's a minor. I make the decisions." Tara didn't raise her voice, but her tone became even firmer. "The law requires that the child be given the opportunity to speak alone." Mom clenched her purse so tightly that her fingers turned white. But finally she left. The door closed and the room became quieter. Tara pulled a chair closer and placed her tablet on her lap. "Sophie, I want you to tell me everything in your own words. When did the dizziness start? When were the injections?" I pointed to the pillow. Hidden deep inside was my diary. Dad had already given her copies, but the original was here. I handed it to Tara. She turned the pages slowly, running her finger over my short lines. Dizziness. Injections. Fog. Her face was stern, but a shadow of sympathy appeared in her eyes. "This is very detailed," she said. "You did the right thing by writing everything down." Tara took a small device out of her bag and placed my plastic bracelet, which had been removed at the hospital, on the table. "It stores an access log. It records when you entered the medical center and when you left. We will compare this data with your notes." I felt a warmth in my chest. For the first time, something in this world confirmed that I wasn't imagining things. My mother returned with the community lawyer. He spoke loudly and confidently. "This is freedom of religion. These are voluntary practices." Tara listened calmly and recorded each of his phrases on her tablet. Then she leaned toward me and said quietly, so that only we could hear, "We are opening an emergency proceeding. This means you'll be in a safe place until the court makes a decision." My throat was dry, but I took a deep breath. It was the first breath that didn't smell of fear. The trial was to take place in 72 hours. The courtroom seemed huge, although it was actually small. Wooden benches, a flag in the corner, a plaque with the judge's name. The air was heavy, and it seemed to me that it was the same as in the hall of the House of Grace, only without the prayers. I sat next to my dad. He couldn't just take me away. There was an interim custody order in place, and visits were only allowed under supervision. Any attempt to bypass the pavilion was recorded by the community as pressure, and any sharp tone was recorded as instability. So he went to court and we ended up here. In front of us lay the documents. Copies of my diary, test results, data from my bracelet. His fingers trembled as he laid out the papers, but he held on. Mom sat on the other side. Next to her was her lawyer, and behind her were several sisters in long dresses. They looked at me as if I had betrayed something sacred. The judge slowly leafed through the documents. His voice was even but tired. We have to determine where the child will stay until the investigation is complete. Mom's lawyer stood up. His words sounded rehearsed. The postings and prayers are voluntary and spiritually meaningful. Sophie has been familiar with them since childhood. Her father, who previously had no interest in her upbringing, is trying to discredit the community. I looked at him and felt my body tense up. He spoke as if I weren't there. Dad stood up. His voice trembled, but he didn't remain silent. My daughter was admitted to the hospital with severe dehydration and sedatives in her blood. This is not a spiritual practice. It is a threat to her life. Scans of the pages of my diary appeared on the screen. Dr. Ortiz confirmed the test results. And then the judge looked directly at me. Sophie, would you like to say a few words? My throat was dry. I saw my mother, her lips pressed into a thin line, and my father, who nodded slightly. I don't want to go back, I whispered. I don't like it there. Those words echoed inside me. I had said them out loud for the first time. The judge slowly took off his glasses and looked at me again. Temporary residence with the father. Leader Caleb Ward and Deacon Marcus are prohibited from approaching the child. I felt something collapse inside me. All the tension I had carried for years shifted. But along with the relief came anxiety. I knew this was only the beginning. After the meeting, Kayla met us at the door. She handed my father an envelope. Here are copies of the internal orders. Signed by Caleb himself. They were never meant to be seen by outsiders. And I realized, the fight was just beginning. The first night at Dad's was strange. Strangely quiet. No bells calling to prayer. No one shouting get up, or on your knees. His apartment seemed small, but at the same time boundless. There were no observers here. Just us. Dad made dinner real food. Potatoes, chicken, a piece of bread. I sat at the table and stared at my plate as if it were a museum exhibit. He noticed my gaze and said gently, "Eat, Sophie. You're allowed to." I slowly picked up my spoon. The simple taste overwhelmed me. I cried right over my plate, because eating without someone else's permission felt like a crime, and a miracle at the same time. I couldn't sleep for a long time that night. I lay down, got up, walked around the room. Any sound from the street seemed like a signal that they would take me away again. And then there was a quiet knock on my bedroom door. "Are you awake?" my dad asked. I shook my head. He came in and sat on the edge of the bed. "You know, it's normal to be afraid. You'll have to learn to trust yourself and your body again. It will take time." I swallowed the lump in my throat and whispered, "I feel like I'm doing everything wrong, even when I'm just sleeping." He put his hand on my shoulder. "You don't have to prove your loyalty here. You just have to be here." I started crying again. This time I didn't hide my face. The next day my mother called. Her voice on the phone was sweet, almost honeyed. "Sophie, this is all a misunderstanding. You know I've always cared about you. You'll come back, won't you?" "You can see I'm exhausted," my mother said into the phone. "They help us at the home. Without them we'd be lost." "Mom, I'm already lost," I replied. Just in a different way. She was silent for a long time, then whispered, "You don't understand how much they promise me if I keep order, and how much they'll take away if I back down." Dad took the phone and replied firmly, "No calls without my permission. She needs to rest." I looked at him with wide eyes. No one at the house had ever set limits for Mom, and here he was setting them for me. In the evening he took out an envelope. "Kayla sent this," he said. "Photos of orders and a service manual. They prove that everything they did to you had nothing to do with medicine." I held those sheets in my hands and felt the past collide with the present. The papers could save not only me, maybe other girls too. The next few days passed in a fog. I was learning to live in a new rhythm. Online school, walks, real dinners at home with my dad. But inside me a fear constantly gnawed. That this was only a pause, not freedom. Dad collected all the documents in a separate folder. His voice when he called the lawyers changed, it became firm and confident. I didn't recognize him like that. Taryn Gwyn visited me often. She asked about my well-being and compared the entries in my diary with the data from the bracelet. Sophie, your notes coincide with the times you visited the medical center, she said once. This is very strong evidence. The prosecutor's office got involved in the case. Lauren Pike, a woman in her 40s with cold eyes and a dictaphone in her hands, came to see us in person. We need to prove that this is not a coincidence, she said. This is a systematic practice. Can you name other girls who had the same symptoms? I listed a few names. She wrote down carefully without interrupting, and I felt that my words were becoming part of the case. Meanwhile, Kayla decided to give a written statement. She admitted that she had performed cleansing protocols under pressure from the pastor. Her signature was in the logs, but she explained that there had never been any appointments with a doctor. After the hospital, I was transferred to my dad, and Kayla was temporarily removed from procedures and put in the kitchen. She came and said, I gave official testimony. I'm being investigated by the nursing board. They could take away my license. But to remain silent is complicity. She spoke calmly, as if she had already accepted the price of her. Sorry I didn't stop it sooner. One evening, Dad opened the mail and read a letter from Lauren. Said briefly, another former member who left the community a year ago has come forward. She confirms the same procedures. We are preparing her for questioning. I looked at the screen and felt for the first time that my story no longer stood alone. But the joy was short-lived. We learned from the news that Caleb Ward had called a public prayer march against government persecution. On the screen, hundreds of people held signs saying, "Don't touch our faith." They chanted his name as if he were a prophet. Dad turned off the TV and said quietly, "They're going to fight." I was silent, but inside I knew that the real war was just beginning. The night was quiet when cars with flashing lights pulled up to the House of Grace. Blue and red flashes pierced the darkness. Armed officers in bulletproof vests got out at the same time, quickly and smoothly. In their hands were search warrants. They entered the medical center abruptly, leaving no time to hide or destroy anything. Marcus jumped out first, his voice piercing the night. "You have no right. This is our religious property. You are violating freedom of religion." The community's lawyer ran after the officers through the corridors, shouting about the Constitution, but his words were lost amid the commands. One by one, the police carried out boxes. Syringes, IVs with unknown solutions, journals signed by Kayla. "Record everything," ordered the senior officer. Photos, videos, serial numbers. The journals were opened right there on the spot. In the doctor column was Kale's signature. No stamp, no license. Just his name. The technicians connected to the computers. Numbers flashed on the monitors, data was copied to hard drives. Everything that had been hidden for years was now to remain as evidence. Kayla stood aside, behind the fence. She had no right to be inside, but she didn't leave. Her fingers clenched the phone as she tried to capture at least something. I saw her tense face. She knew that now Caleb would suspect her. Amidst the chaos, I noticed several women in long dresses quickly exiting through a side door. They were carrying bags and moving hurriedly, and among them was my mother. She didn't look back. She just disappeared into the darkness with the others. A chill ran down my spine. She was running away with them. The courtroom was fuller than ever. It was no longer just my fate that was being decided here. Now the entire House of Grace was standing in the dock. At the entrance, a crowd of journalists held their cameras, trying to capture Caleb's face. He walked proudly in a dark suit, with the same smile that had once charmed my mother. Not as a suspect, as a pastor preaching. People from the community looked at him with reverence, as if he were their martyr, not the man whose signature was on the protocols with injections and IVs. I sat next to my dad. In front of us lay stacks of documents. My diary, data from the bracelet, photos of the orders Kayla had passed on, the results of the search of the medical center. All of this was to be used as ammunition. The judge reminded us that today the issue of permanent custody would be decided. The case would also be referred to a grand jury to determine whether to bring criminal charges against Caleb and Marcus. The community's lawyers tried to play to the crowd. This is a matter of faith. The medical procedures were symbolic. The postings were voluntary. The child agreed to them himself. I felt my hands getting cold. They were talking again as if I wasn't there. Dad stood up. His voice was even almost calm, but that made it even stronger. My daughter was admitted to the hospital with sedatives in her blood that were injected without any right. This is not symbolic. This is a crime. Lauren Pike, a representative of the prosecution, laid out photographs in front of the judge. Bags of medicine, journals with signatures, copies of orders. Her voice was clear. This is not religion. This is illegal medical practice that has harmed children. I listened and felt a strange warmth in my chest. For the first time I was not alone. After a recess, the judge announced, permanent custody of Sophie Gale is transferred to her father, Jason Gale. Caleb Ward and Marcus are prohibited from any contact. The search materials and orders are being forwarded to a grand jury for review. I squeezed my father's hand. He exhaled as if for the first time in many years. Then my mother asked to speak. She stood up. Her face was tense, her eyes fragile. I want a private meeting with my daughter. No cameras. No lawyers. The room fell silent. The meeting was scheduled at the municipal center. A small room with white walls, a round table, plastic chairs. The atmosphere was as if every day they tried to piece together someone's broken life. I sat there clutching a bottle of water. The door opened and my mother entered quickly, but without the confidence I had seen in her at the House of Grace. She looked exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes, her hair hastily pulled back. Sophie. Her voice broke. She reached out her hands, but I didn't move. We sat facing each other. We were silent for a long time. Only the counselor who was present said quietly, "You can speak openly here." Mom looked away and spoke almost in a whisper. I thought I was doing the right thing. That I was keeping you clean. But it turned out. The words stuck in her throat. It turned out that I was lying under IVs. I interrupted. My voice trembled, but I didn't look away. Did you know what they were doing to me? Mom covered her face with her hands. Her shoulders shook. I closed my eyes. Caleb said it was for your own good. I believed him. Because I was afraid that without him we would be left with nothing. The words cut into me like a knife. I wanted to scream, but I said calmly, almost coldly, I wanted you to be my mother, not his follower. Mom cried. The counselor handed her a tissue. I'm ready to go through the reunification program therapy, she said through her tears. If you let me. I was silent for a long time. Anger was still boiling inside me, but alongside it was a small seed of hope. Okay, I whispered. But without him. Never again. She nodded without looking up. When the meeting was over, my dad was waiting for me in the hallway. I walked out and took a deep breath for the first time in a long time. That same day, Kayla received a letter from the nursing board. It was official. The investigation was open. Several months passed. My life began to resemble something I hadn't had in a long time: normality. School, friends, dinners at home with dad. Medication was now prescribed by a doctor, not a pastor. And no one woke me up in the middle of the night to pray. But the past had left its mark. And I didn't want it to be confined to the pages of my diary. A small exhibition was opening at the City Art Center. I stood by the wall looking at the glass display cases. Inside them were anonymized pages from my diary. Lines with numbers, short notes, injections, night shift, dizziness. It looked almost like art, but behind every word was my body. People walked among the exhibits, some quietly commenting. Near the entrance lay a catalog and a list of resources for those who had experienced religious or medical violence. A representative of the prosecutor's office spoke at the opening. She said simply, "Anyone who sees something like this is obliged to speak up. We can no longer allow children to be broken under the guise of faith." I saw Kayla in the crowd. She stood modestly, trying not to attract attention. I met her gaze and nodded slightly. It was my way of saying thank you without words. Later that evening I returned home. I sat down at the table and took out my old diary. The pages were filled from edge to edge. I put it in a box and closed it. Then I took out a new notebook. Clean white. I stared at the cover for a long time before writing a word on it. This time it wasn't purity. I wrote, "My life." And for the first time I felt that it really belonged to me.